Picture a cardboard box sitting on a warehouse floor in Sweden. It looks like something you'd wrestle into the back of your car after a Saturday trip to IKEA. Except this box does not hold furniture. Inside is an entire house. Walls, roof, floor, a locking front door, even a solar panel. 4 ordinary people with no construction experience can turn it into a home in about 4 hours, and it costs roughly $1,000. Right now, versions of this idea are sheltering families who lost everything, from earthquake survivors in Nepal to homeless Americans sleeping in parking lots. This is the story of how a flat-pack box became one of the most important designs of our lifetime, and why it almost did not happen. To understand why this box matters, you have to understand what it replaced. For decades, when disaster struck anywhere in the world, the answer was a tent. A canvas or plastic emergency tent, the kind you've seen in news footage of refugee camps, flapping in the wind in long white rows. Those tents were designed as a temporary fix, something to get a family through a few weeks until real help arrived. The trouble is that real help rarely arrives in a few weeks. The average refugee spends years in displacement, sometimes more than a decade. And the tents they live in start falling apart in about 6 months. The sun eats the fabric. The rain finds every seam. Winter turns them into ice boxes, and summer turns them into ovens. Families were raising children through entire childhoods inside structures meant to last 1 season. Aid agencies knew it too. Every replacement tent cost money. Every resupply convoy cost more. And camps that were supposed to close within a year were still standing a decade later with the same families inside. The temporary solution had quietly become permanent for everyone except the tents themselves. There was no privacy either, and no door that locks. For a mother alone with her children in a camp of 80,000 strangers, that missing lock was the difference between sleeping and lying awake all night listening. And here at home in America, the picture was not much prettier. On any given night, hundreds of thousands of Americans sleep outside, in cars, in doorways, under highway overpasses. Cities were spending fortunes managing the problem without solving it. When someone lives on the street, taxpayers still pay for them, just in the most expensive ways possible. Emergency room visits, ambulance rides, police calls, jail nights. Researchers who followed chronically homeless individuals found the public often spends more than $30,000 a year per person just to keep someone in that revolving door. We were paying luxury apartment prices for people to sleep on concrete. So the problem was sitting there in plain sight. Millions of people needed a structure that was better than a tent, cheaper than a building, and fast enough to deploy anywhere. The question was, who would actually build it? The answer started taking shape around 2010 in Sweden, with a small team of designers led by a man named Johan Carlson. They weren't famous architects. They were practical people asking a very Swedish question. If we can ship a wardrobe across the world in a flat box and have a customer assemble it in an afternoon, why can't we do that with a house? Carlson and his colleagues spent months studying how families actually lived in emergency tents, not how planners assumed they lived. They watched where people cooked, where children slept, where belongings were stashed and hidden, and they designed backward from those real habits instead of forward from a blueprint. The idea sounds almost too simple, but the team knew that simple was exactly the point. In a disaster zone, you don't have cranes, contractors, electricity, lumber yards, or building permits. What you have is people, ordinary people with strong hands and every reason in the world to work fast. A shelter that required experts would fail. A shelter that a grandmother, a teenager, and 2 neighbors could raise before sunset might actually change something. The project became known as Better Shelter, and it found a powerful backer in the IKEA Foundation, the charitable arm of the furniture giant. The foundation put serious money behind the prototypes. Then came the partnership that made it real. The United Nations Refugee Agency, the organization responsible for sheltering displaced families across the globe agreed to test the design in actual camps with actual families. In 2013, prototype units went up in refugee camps in Ethiopia and Iraq. And this is the part of the story most design documentaries skip, because it's not glamorous. The first versions had problems. Families living in the Ethiopian camp gave blunt feedback. The ventilation needed work in desert heat. The anchoring had to survive real windstorms, not laboratory windstorms. The designers listened, went back to Sweden, and revised, then revised again. The shelter that eventually emerged wasn't drawn in a studio and handed down from on high. It was co-written by the refugees who lived in it. That detail matters because it's the reason the final product worked. So what exactly comes out of those boxes? 2 flat-pack cartons, together weighing about as much as a large refrigerator. Inside, a galvanized steel frame that slots together, panel by panel, into a structure of about 180 square feet, roughly the size of a modest bedroom, enough for a family of 5. The walls and roof are lightweight polymer panels that insulate against heat and cold far better than canvas ever could. There are windows for daylight and high vents for airflow. On the roof sits a small solar panel, which powers a LED lamp inside and a USB port for charging a phone. For a displaced family, a charged phone is the thread connecting them to relatives who don't know if they're alive. And then there's the front door. A real, rigid door, with a lock. Aid workers reported something remarkable once the shelters went up. Women in the camps said the lock changed everything. Children could be left to nap safely while a mother stood in the ration line. Belongings stopped disappearing. People began sleeping through the night. The designers had expected praise for the insulation or the solar panel. What people talked about was the lock. Dignity, it turns out, has hardware. Assembly requires no power tools, no generator, no crew. Everything needed is packed in the box, along with a picture-based instruction manual that works in any language. The same philosophy behind every IKEA bookcase you've ever sworn at in your living room. 4 people, following the pictures, can go from sealed boxes to a standing, lockable home in around 4 hours. The structure is engineered to last at least 3 years, 6 times the lifespan of the tent it replaces. And in practice, many units have served far longer. The flat pack solved a hidden problem too, one most of us never think about. Shipping. Emergency aid lives and dies on cargo space. Because each shelter travels as 2 slim cartons instead of a bulky finished structure, far more homes fit into a single shipping container, which means 1 plane, 1 truck, 1 convoy can carry shelter for many more families at once. When the road into a disaster zone is only passable for a day, that math is the difference between a village housed and a village waiting in the rain. By 2015, the United Nations was convinced. It placed an order for 10,000 units, and the boxes started shipping to the places the news cameras were pointed at. After the earthquake in Nepal flattened entire villages. In the spring of 2015, better shelter units went up not just as homes, but as medical clinics, because doctors needed clean, enclosed rooms and needed them immediately. Some units became vaccination points. Others became registration offices where families could report missing relatives, and private rooms where mothers could be seen with their children away from the crowds. The box could become whatever a shattered community needed a clean, dry, lockable room to be. Units rose in northern Iraq for families fleeing violence. They appeared on the Greek island of Lesbos during the refugee crisis, sheltering people who had crossed the sea in rubber boats with nothing. Then, in 2016, something happened that stunned the design world. The Design Museum in London awarded the Flatpack Refugee Shelter its Beazley Design of the Year, the same honor that had gone to sleek electric cars and famous architecture. A humble box, built for the poorest people on Earth, beat them all. The jury's reasoning was simple. Design is supposed to solve problems, and no design that year solved a bigger one. But before the confetti settles, I have to tell you about the failure, because there was a serious one, and it nearly derailed everything. The city of Zurich, in Switzerland, had purchased dozens of units to house asylum seekers. Before moving families in, Swiss authorities ran the shelters through their notoriously strict fire safety testing. The panels did not pass, the material burned faster than Swiss building codes allowed, and Zurich halted the project. Headlines followed, and critics pounced. Skeptics said it proved the whole idea was naive, a rich company's feel-good experiment that could not meet real standards. Better Shelter had a choice at that moment: defend the product or fix it. They chose to fix it. The team went back into development and engineered improved panels with better fire performance, and they were unusually public about the process, publishing what went wrong and what changed. In an industry where companies bury their failures, a shelter maker stood up and said, "We were not good enough yet, and here's the proof we have gotten better." The revised units kept shipping, and the organization kept iterating year after year, treating a 200-pound box of panels the way software companies treat their apps. Version after version, each one better than the last. It is worth pausing on how rare that is. Recalls get buried. Press statements get lawyered into fog. But this team understood something most companies never do: that trust is the real product, and trust survives a failure only when the failure is admitted out loud. By the end of the decade, tens of thousands of these shelters had housed displaced families across dozens of countries. But the most surprising chapter of this story wasn't happening in refugee camps overseas. It was happening in the United States. Because somewhere along the way, American city officials, church groups, and veterans advocates looked at those flat-pack shelters on the news and asked an uncomfortable question. If a $1,000 box can house a family in a disaster zone in 4 hours, why is a veteran sleeping under a tarp in Los Angeles? It's a fair question, and it leads to a number that should stop every American in their tracks. On any given night in this country, more than 30,000 veterans are homeless. Men and women who wore the uniform, who stood watch so the rest of us could sleep, are themselves sleeping in tents, in cars, and on sidewalks. Many of them are older veterans, Vietnam era and Gulf War era, exactly the generation watching this video. And veterans are only part of the picture. The fastest growing group of homeless Americans right now is people over 55. Ordinary people who worked their whole lives, then hit one medical bill, one rent increase, or one layoff they couldn't absorb, and found themselves sleeping in a car at 67 years old. Most of them never saw it coming. And here is the heartbreaking part. Almost none of them knew that there are emergency rental programs, eviction protections, and assistance funds that could have kept them housed, because nobody ever sat them down and explained what help actually exists and how to reach it before it's too late. So I put all of it into a free guide called the Veterans Blueprint. I built it with veterans in mind first, because they've earned that much. But the help inside works for anyone. It covers the warning signs that homelessness is closer than people think, the specific programs that can stop an eviction before it happens, where to find real help if someone is already on the street, and how to actually make a difference if you want to help someone who is struggling. Whether money is tight for you right now, or you love someone whose money is tight, or you simply want to help, the link is in the description below this video. It takes 10 seconds to grab it, and it could keep a roof over someone's head. Now, back to the story, because the American chapter is where things get interesting. The flat pack idea crossed the ocean and took root in Everett, Washington, where a company called Pallet began manufacturing rapid assembly shelters specifically for American homelessness. Their founder, Amy King, built the company with a workforce that includes people who had themselves experienced homelessness and incarceration, people building the very shelters they once needed. Pallets units go up even faster than the originals, in under an hour, and cities began arranging them into what are now called tiny shelter villages. Los Angeles opened rows of them on unused lots. Communities across Washington, Oregon, and California followed. Each village pairs the shelters with the things a structure alone can't provide: caseworkers, meals, showers, help with paperwork, a path back. And the results started coming in. In village after village, people who had spent years on the street stabilized within weeks. They kept appointments. They took medications on schedule, because the medications were no longer being stolen while they slept. Caseworkers said the hardest part of their job, simply finding their clients from one day to the next, disappeared almost overnight, because for the first time, their clients had an address. And veterans organizations took notice, because the model fits homeless veterans almost perfectly. Many veterans avoid traditional group shelters. After military service, and sometimes after trauma, sleeping in a crowded room full of strangers can feel impossible. But a private unit with a door that locks, lined up in a village with fellow veterans next door? That structure of independence plus community echoes something familiar. It looks, more than a little, like a barracks with dignity. Veterans who had refused shelter for years said yes to a small locked room of their own. Now, I need to give you the other side, because this story isn't a fairy tale, and you deserve the full picture. Serious housing advocates raise a real concern. A shelter is not a home. These small units, some of the American versions, barely 100 square feet with no plumbing, are a bridge, and bridges are only good if they lead somewhere. The fear is that cities will buy a few hundred flat pack units, take a nice photo, and call the problem solved, while the actual solution, permanent affordable housing, keeps getting postponed. There have been villages where people stayed in temporary shelters far longer than intended because the next step never materialized. The 3-year lifespan of the panels becomes a quiet deadline that everyone pretends not to see. The neighborhoods push back too. Nearly every proposed shelter village in America has faced a packed city council meeting, with residents worried about property values and safety. Some of those fights have delayed projects for years while people slept outside within walking distance of the empty lot being argued over. And yet, the evidence keeps pointing in one direction. When cities compare the cost of a shelter village against the cost of doing nothing, the village wins, and it isn't close. A unit costing $1,000 to a few $1,000s, plus services, against $30,000 or more per person per year in emergency rooms, ambulances, and jail cells. Communities that moved people from street to shelter to housing watch those emergency costs fall. It turns out the most expensive thing a city can do about homelessness is nothing. We've been running that experiment for 40 years, and the results are on every corner. But numbers only tell half the story. So let me tell you what the residents say. Because their words are strikingly consistent, whether the shelter stands in a refugee camp in Iraq or a parking lot in Los Angeles. They talk about sleep, real sleep, for the first time in months or years, because nobody can reach them behind that locked door. They talk about the light switch, the small miracle of deciding for yourself when it's dark. They talk about small routines returning, making a cup of coffee in the morning, keeping a photograph on a shelf without wondering if it will still be there by nightfall. One veteran in a shelter village described hanging his jacket on a hook inside his unit and standing there looking at it because it had been 6 years since he'd had a hook, a wall, and the certainty that both would still be his in the morning. A mother in a camp overseas said her daughter started doing schoolwork again once there was a floor to sit on and a lamp to read by. These are the minimum conditions under which a human being can begin to plan a future. A person who slept safely can sit through a benefits appointment. A person with an address can receive the letter that gets their housing application approved. The box doesn't fix a life. It makes fixing a life possible. So let's return to where we started, with that plain cardboard carton sitting on a warehouse floor in Sweden. It still looks like it should hold a bookshelf, but we know better now. Inside that box is a locked door for a mother who hasn't slept in a month. A charging port connecting a father to the family searching for him. A wall where a veteran can finally hang his jacket. The people who designed it never claimed it would end homelessness or empty the world's refugee camps, and it won't. What they proved is something quieter and maybe more important. That the distance between a human being sleeping on the ground and a human being sleeping behind a locked door is 4 hours, 4 helpers, and about $1,000. The excuse that helping is too complicated and too expensive died in those camps and those parking lots. What remains is simply the question of whether we choose to do it. If this story moved you, there's another one you need to hear, about the people working to make sure no American spends another winter outside, and what's standing in their way. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next one.